Hey guys, how you going? I found something really interesting, and I want to make a disclaimer before I start this. I'm not saying that I believe this, but it's definitely interesting. It's called Wiki of the Damned. Dave Envoy's entire lifetime of work is available on a flash drive that can be obtained here. The flash drive includes the anti-fascist books available on this site. And this is spitfirelist.com. I don't know who it is. So that's why I'm making the disclaimer. I'm not saying I believe this. This description contains material not contained in the original broadcast. Introduction. Now this is like the Australian version of the Finders. The first of several programs dealing with WikiLeaks. This broadcast examines an intellectual connected mind control cult with which WikiLeaks kingpin Julian Assange appears to be affiliated, as well as connected, as it is ruthless and criminal. The Santiniketon Park Association of Anne Hamilton Byrne conditioned children with drugs, sensory deprivation, sleep deprivation, torture, and ritual sex abuse in order to produce subjects who bent to the will of the group's leader. Bear with it, guys, because it just gets interesting. That's all I'm going to say. I read a little bit of it. I didn't read all of it. But I'm just thinking, from what we know about Assange, and what we, if you know what, if you know what Q has been doing as well, this might make sense as to one of the people that should be let off because they did work with them. If you understand what I mean. I'm not sure if you understand what I mean, but some people will be let off because they turned and worked for the other side. So, and I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is we have to be careful. Very careful. Okay? Yeah, I won't say any more than that right now. I'm just going to keep reading. Although Assange, pictured above, not left, claims to have been on the run from the cult, there you go. He may have turned on them. His claims of links to Australian intelligence plus his strange platinum-coloured hair, distinctive of children raised in the group, suggests that the connections may run much deeper. Recall in this context that the group practices rigorous, sophisticated mind control methodology, and Assange himself may be sincerely unaware of the depth of his apparent links to the group. The organisation also develops multiple identities for the children raised in its ranks, as well as obtaining multiple passports for them. Assange's mother claims his hair turned white following a difficult custody case involving a child of his, as will be seen later. Assange claims that Australian intelligence has advised him, and there's an apparent link between Australian intelligence and the cult. The title of the program comes from two sci-fi horror movies from the late 1950s and 60s called Children of the Damned and Village of the Damned. Both movies featured a generation of platinum blonde children with psychokinetic powers, preternatural intelligence, and a really bad attitude. The children are pictured in a promotional poster for the film in the upper left. No, it's upper, just above. Cult leader Hamilton Byrne, inset, and her children are pictured above and at right. I can't see that. A still from the film is at right, which is above. Maybe it's above that. And no. A still from the film, Is It Right? No. Assange is pictured twice at left. Is this a case of life imitating art? Possessing considerable wealth, in control of his own psychiatric hospital composed largely of well-heeled professional people, utilised as an experimentation centre by one of Australia's leading Catholic psychologists, linked to the Australian minister overseeing that country's intelligence service. The family, as they like to be called, used these connections to escape the punishment that would certainly have followed their activities. Available evidence suggests that the group is an intelligence front. Even former cult members who have turned on the organisation have been drawn back into its fold and reconciled with Anne Hamilton Byrne. Targeting Russia, China and some of the Central Asian states that emerged following the breakup of the Soviet Union, WikiLeaks has pursued a political agenda that smacks of a third position, UNPO, underground Reich, political orientation. The group has also stung the United States, making an already difficult Afghanistan policy that much more difficult, following their leaks of key US documents about NATO involvement in that country. And to me, this sort of sounds like it's coming from a very left-leaning side. Program highlights include the group's excessive secretiveness, the group's lack of candour about their sources of financing in particular, pharmaceutical company Sandoz alleged dispensing of free LSD to the family, partial discussion of WikiLeaks' connection to the milieu of Pirate Bay and Swedish fascist financier Carl Lundstrom, the Hamilton Burns cult caring for Lord Casey, the Australian cabinet member charged with oversight of the Australian Intelligence Agency, the Hamilton Burns cult's close association with Catholic psychologist Ronald Conway, Conway's alleged molestation of people associated with the cult, Conway's role as an expert commentator on the church's molestation scandals, a Time magazine review that reinforces the hypothesis that Assange was part of the Hamilton Burns cult. And we know how much the Catholic Church is involved up to their ears in all this. I'm just saying, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't know. I just don't know. We just don't know. Number 1, the program begins with the discussion of a cult with which Assange appears to have been affiliated, although he minimises his connection to them. It is worth noting that fleeing this cult apparently dominated much of his life at this point, yet the group's powerful connections appear to have allowed them to track him and his mother. Note that, although on the run from the group, Assange's mother discussed their whereabouts and frequented some of the same places. This may indicate a lack of imagination and or resources on the part of Mama Assange, or it may indicate a process of creating a legend, a plausible cover for observed phenomenon. For example, if someone noted a resemblance between Julian Assange and children belonging to the cult, it could be neutralised by saying that he was an opponent of the group. In light of the apparent mind control techniques practiced by the group, indications of the group's possible intelligence connections, as well as deliberate and extensive operations to obfuscate the identity of cult members, one should take much of what Assange says about his relationship to the group with a grain of salt. Might he be a member of the cult who was sheep-dipped to mask his links to the group? Assange's own track record indicates a record of deliberate, elusive behaviour and statements. When Assange was 8, Claire left her husband and began seeing a musician, with whom she had another child, a boy. The relationship was tempestuous. The musician became abusive, she says, and they separated. A fight ensued over the custody of Assange's half-brother, and Claire felt threatened, fearing the musician would take away her son. Assange recalled her saying, Now we need to disappear, and he lived on the run with her from the age of 11 to 16. When I asked him about the experience, he told me that there was evidence that the man belonged to a powerful cult called the Family. Its motto was unseen, unknown, and unheard. Some members were doctors who persuaded mothers to give up their newborn children to the cult's leader, Anne Hamilton Byrne. The cult had moles in government, Assange suspected, who provided the musician with leads on Claire's whereabouts. In fact, Claire often told friends where she had gone or hid in places where she had lived before. 2. Wikipedia gives a nice overview of the group. Note that Wikipedia should, as a rule, be scrutinised very carefully. It is frequently an error. When sources and links check out, as they do here, it's generally reliable. Around 1964, Dr. Raynor Johnson was hosting regular meetings of a religious and philosophical discussion group led by Hamilton Byrne at Santon, I can't say that, and it's supposed to be Australian. His home at Ferny Creek in the Dandenong Ranges on the eastern outskirts of Melbourne. Also connected was a series of weekly talks he gave at the Council of Adult Education in Melbourne, entitled The Macrocosm and the Microcosm. The group purchased an adjoining property which they named that park in 1968 and constructed a meeting hall, that lodge. I'm just going to call it that because I can't say it. Santiniketan Lodge. Honestly. The association consisted of middle class. If anyone knows how to say that, can you put it in the comments? The association consisted of middle class professional people. It has been estimated that a quarter were nurses and other medical personnel, and that many were recruited by Johnson, who referred them to Hamilton Byrne's Hatha yoga classes. 2. Members mainly lived nearby in suburbs and townships in the Dandenongs, meeting each Tuesday and Thursday and Sunday evening. 3. At that lodge. Crowther House in Olinda, or another property in the area known as the White Lodge. During the 1960s and 1970s, New Haven Hospital in Kew was a private psychiatric hospital owned and managed by Marion Villamek. That member. Many of its staff and attending psychiatrists were also members. Many patients at New Haven were treated with the hallucinogenic drug LSD. The hospital was used to recruit potential new members from among the patients, and also to administer LSD to members under the direction of that psychiatrist Dr. John Mackay and Dr. Howard Whittaker. One of the original members of the association was given LSD, electroconvulsive therapy, and 2 leucotomies during the late 1960s. Although the psychiatric hospital had been closed down by 1992, in that year a new inquest was ordered into the death of New Haven patient in 1975 after new claims that his death had been due to deep sleep therapy. The inquest heard evidence concerning the use of electroconvulsive therapy, LSD, and other practices at New Haven, but found no evidence that deep sleep had been used on this patient. The New Haven building was later reopened as a nursing home with no connections to its previous owner or uses. What does that sound like to you? That sounds like the LSD in that. Sounds like exactly what happened in the US. Anne Hamilton Byrne acquired 14 infants and young children between about 1968 and 1975. Some were the natural children of those members. Others had been obtained through irregular adoptions arranged by lawyers, doctors, and social workers within the group who could bypass the normal processes. The children's identities were changed using false birth certificates or deed poll, all being given the surname Hamilton Byrne, and dressed alike even to the extent of their hair being dyed uniformly blonde. The children were kept in seclusion and homeschooled at Kyalama, a rural property usually referred to as Up Top, at Taylor Bay on Lake Eildon near the town of Eildon, Victoria. They were taught that Anne Hamilton Byrne was their biological mother and knew the other adults in the group as aunties and uncles. They were denied almost all access to the outside world and subjected to a discipline that included frequent corporal punishment and starvation diets. The children were frequently dosed with the psychiatric drugs. Oh, here we go. Anatensol, diazepam, haloperidol, largatitil, mogadon, Serapax, stelazine, Togretol, or tofranil. On reaching adolescence, they were compelled to undergo an initiation involving LSD. While under the influence of the drug, the child would be left in a dark room alone, apart from visits by Hamilton Byrne or one of the psychiatrists from the group. Oh, that would be horrific. What is wrong with these people? Well, we know what's wrong with them. 3. More about the cult from an article about a long overdue bust of the group. Note the difficulty law enforcement had in bringing this group to justice. One of the many indications that the organisation was connected. The leader of Australia's most notorious cult, the family, remains unrepentant 2 decades after the raid that shocked the nation. Anne Hamilton Byrne broke her silence yesterday, saying she wasn't ready to die, after reconciling with Sarah Moore, the daughter who betrayed her to the authorities. The family made headlines around the world in 1987 when the Australian Federal Police and Community Services Victoria raided the cult's property at Lake Eildon and took 6 children into care. Police later found 14 children had been brought up in almost complete isolation, believing they were the offspring of Hamilton Byrne and her late husband Bill. In fact, none of them was the Hamilton Byrnes, but children of single mothers who had been pressured into giving them up for adoption, or cult members who did not want them. But it was the way the children had been treated that really shocked the nation. Hamilton Byrne had ordered the children's hair be dyed peroxide blonde and they be dressed in identical outfits. It was also alleged they'd been half-starved, beaten and forced to take large quantities of tranquilizers to calm them down, and even fed LSD when they became adults. Now, in the first ever interview at her sprawling Olinda compound, the cult leader has defended how she raised the children and attacked those who said she mistreated them as lying bastards. Of her critics, she said, "I would love to put them right, but I can't." 4. More about the practices of the group from a policeman who helped bring them to heel. Lex DeMann, the policeman who spent 5 years bringing the family cult leader Anne Hamilton Byrne to justice, is still haunted by the case and its toll on everyone involved. And while proud that the Operation Forest, the task force on which he had worked from 1989 to 1994, eventually secured her conviction for perjury, he is still angry and Hamilton Byrne escaped punishment for alleged maltreatment of the children in her care. Mr. DeMann said Hamilton Byrne was lucky the children who had endured beatings, druggings and starvation at the family's Lake Eildon property were too traumatized to testify against their alleged tormentor. One girl looked like she was 7, but was in fact 11. She was suffering from psychosocial dwarfism, Mr. DeMann said. "I didn't think at the time, and even today, that many of the kids would be able to sustain giving evidence in the witness box. I think they've been damaged too much." The detective's decision to go after Hamilton Byrne for falsifying documents came in 1991 when the cult's solicitor, Peter Kibbe, decided to cooperate with police. Documents don't lie. People lie on documents. A document might be false, but it's a human being that puts the information on it, Mr. DeMann said. Kibbe then persuaded one of the former aunties, Pat McFarlane, to make a statement. After months of interviews and later armed with the evidence to secure a warrant to arrest Hamilton Byrne, police still took 3 years to find her. 5a. Another indication of serious institutional support for the cult concerns the participation in their activities of Ronald Conway, one of Australia's most prominent Catholic intellectuals. Conway appears to have engaged in molestation of children placed in his care. Conway has also written dismissively of complaints of sexual abuse against Catholic priests. Of paramount importance here is the fact that the hospital at which he conducted his LSD experiments was under the control of that Park Association, the family. Conway's autobiography says that he began LSD experiments at St. Vincent's Hospital, and former patients say that Conway also administered LSD to them at New Haven Psychiatric Hospital, which was situated at 86 Normandy Road, Kew, in Melbourne's inner east. In the late 1960s and during the 1970s, New Haven Hospital was owned and managed by Marion Villamick, a member of a New Age sect called that Park Association, also known as the Family. A leader of the sect, Anne Hamilton Byrne, was also an administrator at the New Haven. Conway, Eric Seal, and other therapists hired consulting rooms there on a sessional basis and were not involved with the sect. New Haven ceased being a hospital in 1992. Ronald Conway became one of Australia's most prominent Catholic intellectuals, writing books and newspaper articles about Australian society. He also appeared in radio and television discussion programs as a psychologist and a social commentator. When the church's sexual scandals became news in Australia in the 1990s, Conway sometimes commented on the issue of celibacy and sexual abuse. 5b. As one wag who blogged about that Park Association observed, what good is an LSD mind control religious cult sexual abuse story without the Catholic Church making a guest appearance? After several sessions with Conway, it was suggested that I undergo LSD therapy in New Haven Private Hospital as an overnight patient. It was explained to me that this therapy was a way to fast-track psychoanalysis and would be very helpful in accepting my sexuality. Conway, as a psychologist, had no qualifications to administer drugs. I did not understand this at the time. During the last session, I came to believe that I had been in the presence of God, who authorized me to lead the sexual life which had been chosen for me. Conway then suggested that I continue to see him without the use of LSD. I explained to him that my finances were stretched and that it was not possible. He said that it was important that I continue to see him, that if I were willing, he would see me at his home in Torrington Street, Canterbury, gratis. What a shock I got one night when he made advances to me and we ended up on the floor of his sitting room. The room was decorated as if it were the inside of an Egyptian tomb. Symbols. He said this should not... Symbols will be their downfall. Is that what this is? Like, it's gone off Julian Assange now, if you've noticed, but it's explaining the group. So I just want to see what else they say. It may be part true. It may be... maybe Assange is running from them and he has gone to Trump and that for help. And maybe they are going to help him because he did spill the beans on them. Just a thought, guys. Anyway, please tell me what you think, and don't think I'm against Julian Assange, because I'm not. He said this should not have happened, but that as bad as it had, we should do it properly in his bedroom. It was a Spartan room with the bed covers on a single bed already turned down and electric bar heaters turned on and resting on tables either side. In the early 1990s, when I was 48 years of age, I was a patient in the Freemasons Hospital and woke up one afternoon to find Ron Conway sitting on my bed holding my hand. He had heard from someone that I was in hospital. I made it clear that I was not happy with his presence. He explained to me that he'd been following my life through a work colleague of mine, another psychologist. Ron Conway never appeared again. Number 6. A more detailed and consequently more horrifying account of the cult's practices was presented by dissident member Sarah Moore, who eventually reconciled with Anne Hamilton Byrne, noting the breeding program alluded to here, as well as the use of multiple identities, birth dates, and passports. Note also Moore's indication that enemies of the group had disappeared. My mother was Anne Hamilton Byrne, the leader of a small sect in the Dandenongs called the Family, or the Great White Brotherhood. I was a small part of her plan to collect children in what she, herself, once called the scientific experiment. Later I discovered it was her intention that we children would continue her sect after the earth was consumed by a holocaust. She saw us as the inheritors of the earth. I didn't know that then. In those days I was just a child of a guru, but child no less. 22 to 28 children all lived at Uptop in its heyday, although the Fosters had varying lengths of stay. She used to say that she couldn't remember all the dates very well because she had so many children. Maybe, in retrospect, we should have realised that that was weird, but then we never thought it was anything out of the ordinary. She decided upon sets of twins and triplets and gave us ages and birth dates to fit in with that idea. Birthday changes was something you accepted. It was as if Anne knew so much more about everything than us, and she just might be revealing another piece of our life plan. If she changed our birthdays. We were the children of the family, the children of Anne Hamilton Byrne. We were dressed alike. Most of the girls' hair was dyed blonde, cut into fringes and worn long with identical hairstyles and identically coloured ribbons. All the boys had bowl haircuts. Why did she raise us in almost total social isolation, miles from anywhere with minimal contact with other humans, apart from the sect members who looked after us? Why did she subject us to the bizarre and cruel regime in which we grew up? Was it to demonstrate that she had power to create a generation that would be reared with her beliefs and believing in her? I suspect perhaps that there were more sinister motives than these alone. Some of us had multiple birth certificates and passports, and citizenship of more than one country. Only she knows why thus was, and why we were also dressed alike, why most of us even had our hair dyed identically blonde. And what about those multiple birth certificates and passports? What does that remind you of? I can only conjecture because I will never know for sure. However, I suspect that she went to such great lengths in order to enable her children to move around in and out of the country, perhaps even to be sold overseas. I'm sure there's a market somewhere in the world for small blonde children with no traceable identities. If she did it, it was a perfect scam. Many ex-sect members have said they were aware that Anne was creating children by a breeding program in the late 1960s. These were invisible kids because they had no papers. There is no proof that they ever existed. Yet we Hamilton Byrne children had multiple identities. These identities could perhaps have been loaned to other children, and the similarity of our appearance used to cover up their absence. One little blonde kid looks very like another in a passport photo. I don't suppose we will ever know the truth because only Anne Hamilton Byrne knows the truth about the whole affair, and the truth is something she will never tell. I am training to be a doctor, but sometimes I think my medical career will be sabotaged because there are still many in the sect who have a lot of influence in professional and academic circles. It may sound melodramatic, but I know some who were Anne's enemies have disappeared in strange circumstances. 7. Among those on the receiving end of the cult's services was Lord Casey, former Governor-General of Australia and the Minister in charge of overseeing the Australian Intelligence Service with which Assange claims to be connected. It has been suggested that Anne would have no power without a syringe. She claimed a lot of knowledge of medical things. She said she had been the matron of a hospital, but there is no evidence she ever did nursing. I can't emphasise the importance of nursing in the sect enough. It was critical to the way she viewed the aunties, and it was what she planned for the girl's future profession. She said nursing was one of the ideal occupations because it was a form of selfless service that led to spiritual advancement. We knew that on their weeks off from up top, the aunties were either training to be nurses or practiced as nurses. Several of the aunties nursed Lord Casey, a former Governor-General of Australia. Italics are mine, DE. Rumour has it he made a significant donation to the sect. 8. More about Lord Casey, his professional history and ideological outlook. In public, Casey seemed to be a devoted Cold War warrior, fervently supportive of Britain and the US, and deeply hostile towards the Soviet Union and China. He was the minister responsible for the Australian Secret Intelligence Service. 9. More about the brutal conditioning program executed by the cult on its acolytes. Notice again the use of multiple identities, passports and birth dates for the children. What are they used for? Once initiated came the go-through, and that meant LSD trips. Everyone knew that it was an inevitable consequence of initiation, one of the rituals that was integral to the spiritual development of the new initiate. I've been present at many go-throughs of people in the sect and ended up having at least a dozen myself. During a go-through, you are supposed to look at yourself and see the badness inside, to regress to significant incidents in childhood and in previous lives which affect your personality and retarded your spiritual development. The drug which Anne sometimes called the herb or the dream medicine, where did I get machine from, was meant to make this easier. It was also meant to make the spiritual bonding easier between master and disciple. You were supposed to recognize her as the one true master, Christ incarnate. She would come into people when they were under and ask, "Do you know who I am?" The correct answer was the Lord incarnate. The incorrect answer meant you weren't working hard enough. Working was looking at yourself and realizing what a horrible person you were, repenting for your sins and purifying yourself. Before my first go-through, I was deprived of sleep for several nights and made to read yoga and the Bible. Beforehand, I'd watch one of my brothers get down on his knees and beg me not to hate him for being a closet homosexual. This confession had been wrung out of him by Anne's several days of intense working under the drug. He felt that he was a failure, and I did my best to tell him that he'd never be a failure to me because I loved him. We were all scared of revealing our weaknesses, but doubted that we would be able to hold anything back once under the influence of the drugs. Anne's technique, pretty typical, of keeping us awake for several days before a go-through, meant that we were incredibly vulnerable anyway. You have to hand it to Anne, she knew her stuff. This was chronic sleep deprivation, and it added to the strain of the whole experience. It's torture. Even today I find if I am really tired I'm prone to flashbacks of LSD, and it is harder to cope than it should be. Add to that sensory deprivation, for I was placed in a quiet and dark room and never knew whether it was day or night. It was also at this time in 1984, just before my initiation, that Anne changed my name and gave me a new identity. No longer was I to be called Andre, who was born in June, July, or maybe September. Now, for some reason that I never knew, I was called Sarah. I was now a triplet and had even changed nationalities. I was born in New Zealand on the 16th of November 1970. I even had a passport to prove this. It may seem bizarre but at the time, I took this in my stride. I didn't even consider it strange that Anne had never told me this information up to now, that previously I had believed I was someone else. This sort of thing, sudden changes in our reality, was par for the course in our lives, and we never questioned surprises. And that takes me to a point that I've been trying to make. When they keep changing things constantly, in like with technology and stuff like that, it's meant to keep people. It's another form of mind control. It's meant to keep people on the edge. And so you've, possibly giving people mental disorders because of so much rapid change and never letting anyone get comfortable. That I previously believed I was someone else. This sort of thing, sudden changes in our reality, was par for the course in our lives, and we never questioned surprises. We were used to unpredictability as far as Anne was concerned. I hated the name Andre, anyway, and being a triplet was more interesting than being a single. I now know that there were several passports in my name, a couple of which were Australian. They all had different birth dates. I also had several birth certificates in different names and in different states. 10a. Sarah Moore suggests a possible reason for the group's apparent ability to escape legal retribution for their activities. Of interest and possible significance also is the allegation by Moore that Sandoz, part of the old IG Farben complex, was providing the group with free LSD. Sandoz also bought the family business of Swiss Nazi financier Karl Lundstrom, thereby empowering him with the capital with which he has realised his political endeavours. Among those endeavours is the Pirate Bay downloading website with an associated political party, the Pirate Party, and PRQ server which hosts WikiLeaks. As we will see in FTR number 725, the Pirate Party is helping sponsor WikiLeaks' presence in Sweden. The bulk of the sect was made up of professional people. Without their support and participation, Anne Hamilton Byrne would never have become what she is today. It was their names, or most importantly, the letters that went after their names, that gave her the credibility and social power she needed. It gave her the means to keep those she already had and to get more and similar people into the cult. These professional people, doctors, lawyers, engineers, architects, psychiatrists, nurses and social workers, allowed her successfully to pull the wool over everyone's eyes for more than 20 years. Had the family been a group of strangely dressed people meeting once or twice a week for meditation and addressed by the master, playing of music and chanting, they would never have gone unnoticed for so long. But pinstripe professionals in their conservative suits, with their impeccable social credentials, could get away with maintaining in their private life morals that were completely at variance with their professional ethics. They looked respectable, people thought, therefore they must be respectable. Who were these professionals? They were doctors who wrote out the prescriptions that controlled us, lawyers who wrote out the deed polls that were needed to forge passports and birth certificates, that created our false identities, social workers who allowed Anne to bypass normal channels to allow her to adopt, or simply steal in some instances, 16 children, doctors and nurses who gave her contacts with rich dying people who left their estates to her. It was the same doctors who signed their death certificates, psychiatrists who had people committed to New Haven, the family-owned psychiatric hospital, and doctors and nurses who supervised the abuse of LSD, which for a while they actually obtained free of charge from the Swiss drug company Sandoz. 10b. A Time review of the recent movie about WikiLeaks, The Fifth Estate, reinforces that working hypothesis. It's not clear what the writer's source is for that assertion. Photos of Assange, children of the cult, are at right. Note the one child bearing a striking resemblance to Assange. For more about the Assange family working hypothesis, see FTR 745. Excerpt. Tall, drawling, and white-maned, he has dyed his hair ever since being introduced into Australian cult as a child. Assange radiates a star quality that impresses all spectators, especially himself. 11. WikiLeaks' political orientation is clarified in an article published in the New Yorker that the group's primary targets are highly oppressive regimes in China, Russia and Central Eurasia, the Earth Island about which we've spoken so often. They're also willing to work against the United States, obviously. I don't know where this person's coming from, to be honest. WikiLeaks' political orientation smacks of a third position UNPO political orientation, one consistent with the Underground Reich. Do not fail to note the potential damage that could result from the publishing the social security numbers of active duty US military personnel. This could lead to, among other things, the compromising of WMD technology nukes in particular. Has this person got something to lose? Assange, despite his claim to scientific journalism, emphasised to me that his mission is to expose injustice, not to provide an even-handed record of events. In an invitation to potential collaborators in 2006, he wrote, "Our primary targets are those highly oppressive regimes in China, Russia, and Central Eurasia. But we also expect to be of assistance to those in the West who wish to reveal illegal or immoral behaviour in their own governments and corporations." He has argued that a social movement to expose secrets could bring down many administrations that rely on concealing reality, including the US administration. Assange does not recognise the limits that traditional publishers do. What do you mean he won't lie for people? Recently he posted military documents that include the social security numbers of soldiers, and in the bunker I asked him if WikiLeaks' mission would have been compromised if he had redacted these small bits. He said that some leaks risked harming innocent people, collateral damage if you will, but that he could not weigh the importance of every detail in every document. Perhaps the social security numbers would one day be important to researchers investigating wrongdoing. He said by releasing the information, he would allow judgment to occur in the open. A year and a half ago, WikiLeaks published the results of an army test conducted in 2004 of electromagnetic devices designed to prevent IEDs from being triggered. The document revealed key aspects of how the devices functioned and also showed that they interfered with communication systems used by soldiers, information that an insurgent could exploit. By the time WikiLeaks published the story, the army had begun to deploy newer technology, but some soldiers were still using the devices. I asked Assange if he could refrain from releasing information that he knew might get someone killed. He said that he had instituted a harm minimisation policy, whereby people named in certain documents were contacted before publication to warn them, but that there were also instances where the members of WikiLeaks might get blood on our hands. Well, it sounds like this person, whoever wrote this, wanted to keep it all quiet still. Interesting. More about the sensitive nature of what WikiLeaks publishes. It might cause loss of life and or limb by US coalition or Afghanistan personnel. In 2007, he published thousands of pages of secret military information detailing a vast number of army procurements in Iraq and Afghanistan. He and a volunteer spent weeks building a searchable database, studying the Army's purchase codes and adding up the cost of the procurements, billions of dollars in all. The database catalogued material that every unit had ordered: machine guns, Humvees, cash counting machines, satellite phones. Assange hoped that journalists would pore through it, but barely any did. "I'm so angry," he said. "This is such a fucking fantastic leak. The Army's force structure of Afghanistan and Iraq down to the last chair and nothing." 13. Another aspect of WikiLeaks that has attracted interest concerns their obfuscation of funding, creating questions about where the money they collect is actually going. The secret-spilling website, WikiLeaks, appears to be a frugal spender, tapping less than 5% of the funds received through two of its three donation methods, according to third-party foundation that managed those contributions. WikiLeaks has received €640,000, 800,000 US, through PayPal or bank money transfers since late December, and spent only €30,000, US 38,000, from that funding, says Henrik Fulda, Vice President of the Berlin-based Wauholland Foundation. The money has gone to pay the travel expenses of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange and spokesman Daniel Schmidt, as well as to cover the costs of computer hardware such as servers and leasing data lines, says Fulda. WikiLeaks does not currently pay a salary to Assange or other volunteers from this funding. Though there have been discussions about doing so in the future, Folder adds, the details have not yet been worked out. The site got another boost in donations in April after it published a controversial video showing a 2007 US Army helicopter attack in Baghdad. WikiLeaks claimed it raised more than $150,000 in less than a week after the release of the video. A US Army intelligence analyst named Bradley Manning was since arrested and charged with being WikiLeaks' source for the video. Assange and other WikiLeaks volunteers have claimed that the organisation commissioned lawyers to defend Manning, and the group has campaigned for more donations from the public to cover the legal expenses. Folder said that no money handled by the foundation has gone to pay expenses for Manning's defence. He didn't know if WikiLeaks obtained money from other sources for the purpose. He said, however, that his foundation would have no problem in principle paying such legal expenses. 14. Many of the organisation's critics have noted the sharp contrast between the opaque nature of its operations and the drive for total transparency it demands on part of the organisations it scrutinises. In the next program about WikiLeaks, we will examine the Warholm Foundation at greater length. The controversial website WikiLeaks, which argues the case of openness in leaking classified or confidential documents, has set up an elaborate global financial network to protect the big secrets of its funding. Some governments and corporations angered by the site's publications have already sued WikiLeaks or blocked access to it, and the group fears that its money and infrastructure could be targeted further. Founder Julian Assange said in an interview in London shortly after publishing 76,000 classified US documents about the war in Afghanistan in July, the move sparked international controversy and put WikiLeaks in the spotlight. In response, the site has established a complex system for collecting and dispersing its donations to obscure their origin and use, Mr. Assange said. Anchoring the system is a foundation in Germany established in memory of a computer hacker who died in 2001. WikiLeaks' financial stability has waxed and waned during its short history. The site shut down briefly late last year, citing lack of funds. But Mr. Assange said the group has raised about $1 million since the start of 2010. I think this was written way back in 2010 too. WikiLeaks' lack of financial transparency stands in contrast to the total transparency it seeks from other governments and corporations. Another fascinating detail concerning the tangled web is that WikiLeaks concerns the PRQ server based in Sweden. In addition to hosting WikiLeaks, it is the base for Pirate Bay, a controlling interest in which is owned by Carl Lundstrom, a prominent Swedish Nazi and financier of that country's leading fascist political party. It is unclear if this would give Swedish Nazi elements to information from documents assessed by WikiLeaks, but that seems a reasonable possibility. I don't know about this person. Okay, let me see when this was written. Does it tell me? Nope. But I do think it was written back in 2010. I also think this has a very left-leaning agenda to it. Although I believe there's truth mixed with lies in this, I really do. I do believe there was a cult, and maybe Assange was part of it, but has tried to escape from it, and has leaked information. And when you look around the world and all these cults and finders and CIA MK Ultra. I don't know what to think of this, guys. What do you think? I think, actually, I do know what to think. I think it's lies mixed with truth. Anyway, guys, I'm not going to read any more because I really think it has a slant from the anti-transparency side of things. But it would be interesting to know where they did get their funding from. But, yeah, I'm sure it's going to come out sooner or later, guys. Let me know what you think about this, because I found it and I started reading it. I was really interested in that Anne Burns cult, because it sounds very much like the Finders to me. Australian version of the Finders, guys. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon, guys. Bye.